In an earlier video, I tried to clarify a few things about the tax increases that were passed during Huckabee's governorship. The Supreme Court of Arkansas basically mandated one of those tax increases. The other two were, in my opinion, completely agreeable with conservative values. All three tax increases were voted upon by the people and passed with large majorities. In this video, I'd like to focus more positively on Huckabee's record as a fiscal conservative. It's necessary to do this because Huckabee is continually being maligned as wanting to enact liberal policies that would increase taxes and make government bigger. Nothing could be further from the truth, and the people that make these charges, such as Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Fred Thompson, Ann Coulter, and all the others, really need to be called out for their dishonesty on this issue. Governor Huckabee cut taxes 94 times during his governorship. He eliminated the capital gains tax on the sale of homes. He reduced the capital gains tax for businesses and individuals. He doubled the standard deduction and the child care credit. He cut welfare rolls by almost 50%. He eliminated the marriage penalty tax. And he followed Ronald Reagan's lead by indexing the income tax. This, in effect, protected people from having to pay higher taxes due to bracket creep, as it's called. I'd like to contrast briefly Mike Huckabee's record with George W. Bush's. George Bush is basically adored by all the Republican pundits and spokesmen that you see on the TV and that you hear on the radio. Now, it is true that George Bush sponsored and signed into law some major tax cuts. But what happened after that? What did he do? He sent us into an oblivion of deficit spending. The budget had actually been balanced during the Republican Revolution of the 90s. That was when Republicans were elected into office in order to restrain Bill Clinton and his tax and spend policies. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House at the time. Somehow, by the time Bush took office in 2001, the deficit was already back up to $5.7 trillion. How that happened is beyond me. How you go from a zero deficit to $5.7 trillion deficit within 3 years, it suggests to me that the budget never really was balanced, that this was all just a bunch of political hype. In any case, now our country is borrowing billions of dollars every year from countries like China and Japan and Saudi Arabia and Great Britain and many other countries. In fact, foreign governments and investors now hold about $2.23 trillion, about 44% of the publicly held U.S. debt. That's up 9.5% from just a year ago. Our national debt is presently increasing by $1.4 billion every day. And it's expected to reach $10 trillion by the time George Bush leaves office. So, all right, he inherited a deficit of $5.7 trillion, but he's basically doubled that. $10 trillion. Thank you, George Bush. Now, contrast that with Governor Huckabee. When he took office, his state was facing a $200 million budget shortfall that was left by his Democratic predecessor. When Huckabee left office last January, the state had a balanced budget. And not just that, but it had an $844 million surplus. When Huckabee left office, tax rates were exactly the same as when he began. So who's got the more fiscally conservative record, Bush or Huckabee? There's no comparison. People like to brag about Bush's tax cuts, but you know, Huckabee also cut taxes, as I said, 90 times. Not just that, he balanced the budget and provided needful services to the people of his state, legitimate services that governments are supposed to provide, such as road construction and education. That is true fiscal conservatism in my book. Furthermore, Huckabee has signed a pledge not to increase taxes. And beyond that, Huckabee is the only presidential candidate calling for genuine, permanent tax reform. Not a little tax cuts here and there that won't actually solve our nation's problems. Rather, he wants to scrap the current tax system altogether and implement the fair tax. Now, the fair tax is often referred to as a sales tax. It's definitely a sales tax, but consider this. The present system is also a sales tax. For example, we get taxed on gasoline, on tobacco, and on many other products. But in addition to that, we get taxed on our income, which is a huge amount. We get taxed on our earnings from investments. We get taxed on exports. People are taxed when they get married. They get taxed when they buy a house or do virtually anything else in life. In fact, they get taxed when they die. The current system also features embedded taxes, which are essentially the same thing as sales taxes because these are factored into the cost of any product that's being sold on the market. Furthermore, the present system discourages domestic investment, and this is just an amazing thing. Nearly $11 trillion are invested in overseas markets. With the implementation of the fair tax, we could bring that money back to America. How much of a stimulus would that be to our economy? You know, it's not even fathomable, really. Meanwhile, the current tax system encourages outsourcing, that is, moving jobs overseas in order to get cheaper labor and to avoid corporate taxes and other regulation taxes. The current tax system requires $11 billion every year just to keep it running. The fair tax would virtually eliminate the IRS. The fair tax is a plan that would eliminate federal tax penalties that stifle or discourage productivity. It is a plan that would allow American businesses and manufacturers to compete on an equal footing with their foreign competitors, for example, China, India. It's a progressive tax plan that would allow Americans to keep their entire paycheck. So why would anyone not be totally supportive of the fair tax? I think there's a lot of misinformation being floated around about it. But I think there's also something more sinister that's been going on. Consider this. During Bush's time in office, the number of lobbyists on Capitol Hill has doubled from 7,000 to 14,000. Be absolutely assured of this. Those lobbyists have a vital stake in the current tax system because it works to their advantage. That is why it's so difficult to effect any genuine tax reform. And trust me, that is why the fair tax plan is being so hotly opposed. I'd like to end this video with a quote from Mike Huckabee. He says, "I pledge free and fair markets and believe that as a nation we can do better to encourage savings, to promote capital investments, and to encourage real wages and jobs here at home. My immediate tax goals include reduction of corporate and personal marginal rates and the elimination of the estate tax, with a long-term goal of the passage of the fair tax." Thank you.